Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today will be part 2 of our discussion of esotericism and masonry with very worshipful brother Zane McCune and worshipful brother Ken Lane.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we're going to keep talking about esotericism. This is part 4, I think, of our series on esotericism. As I said earlier, we have very worshipful brother Zane McCune and worshipful brother Ken Lane, who are Masons here in Washington, along with myself, and very worshipful brother David Colbeth. And we also have our third usual host, worshipful brother Stephen Chung from British Columbia. And unfortunately, Trevor still couldn't be with us this evening. He's not feeling too well, so he is just the 3 hosts and the 2 guests, and we'll have to make do. So, David, you had a question that you were about to pose when the green room before we started, and now I'm going to make you do it in public. So go.
Well, hopefully this will fall in line with what we were going to ask next, the next few questions. But when I think of learning about Masonry, esotericism, and there's the field is so expansive, the onion is so big, to use Zane's analogy. When in reality, we could look to our own, as a simple point, you can look to our own degrees and our own lectures and our own, just in what we call the standard work, just in that document, you could peel back so many layers of the onion. And so I guess we'll go right into just talking about this in this kind of public forum. Does it negate the power of the esoteric concepts? So we were in the blue room, we were talking about how, if Zane told me that his secrets of the financial world, his codes, then it wouldn't be a secret anymore. And so as we talk about these things and reveal them, if you will, which we're not going to go into any detail because we're bound as Masons not to do that. But if we talk about some of these ideas or open concepts, are we lessening the value of those secrets, if you will, or those? Is it more, maybe it's a following question, but is it more valuable for a person to go and learn it himself? Or we were talking about in the previous segment, and Ken was saying that as we bump against each other, when we interact with each other, we learn more from each other, which I agree with. Yes, I love to learn, but I also love to learn from. Ken, Zane, whoever wants to.
Ken, you want to take a stab at that first? I'm happy to chime in after you.
So I'll start. For several years, I worked for Bank of America, and as an employee, they still have a board of directors that met. And I go, but as an employee, I didn't know what they talked about. So is that a cabal, a secret society? And the answer is no, because they have a private meeting where they privately discuss things, hash out what interest rates are. The thing is, the public sees everything that they do. And Freemasonry, in a lot of ways, is the same. We get together and we're talking about very specific information. Can someone from the outside get as much information? Sure, you could get an outsider's kind of point of view and stop and read and see all these things. If you were in the inner circle sharing, talking about this, really spending some time contemplating on what some of those things are, would you get a lot more out of it? Certainly.
I would say that if we were to, right, to your point, Dave, we wouldn't dive deep into our ciphers, and we wouldn't necessarily reveal, our obligations and things that we've said that we wouldn't as Masons. But I would say, if we were going to talk about sacred geometry, for example, that's a topic that at first blush you might say, well, that's an interesting topic. What does that really have to do with Freemasonry? Okay. Well, first of all, it's a topic in and of itself, but you might find in that conversation some parallels to our allegory of the winding stairs, for example. And then, in our lodge, that's a presentation. So that was a whole topic. So that's not a tangent off of something that's not part of our original 3 degrees. As a matter of fact, I think there's so much to unpack in just our 3 degrees. That's probably what we should be spending time doing at a lodge meeting. It's not really planning the dinner. It's not really planning
for purposes. Sorry.
Yeah, it's really kind of unpacking the 3 degrees, but oftentimes that's only done at a degree, which is a demonstration of the degree, not necessarily talking about the degree. So, we might get into a sacred geometry conversation and presentation at our lodge. The point within a circle is also a universal symbol. Freemasonry by no means has a corner of the market on the point within a circle symbol. It has certain meanings to Freemasons, but it has certain meanings to other cultures, to other mystery schools. And you might find, as you explore what those other organizations use that point within a circle for, you as a Freemason might find that there's a lot of similarity there. Now, does that mean we're exactly like those other organizations? No, it doesn't necessarily mean it, but it's awfully interesting, especially when we talk about Freemasonry having existed since time immemorial. So, is there a connection? I would never say yes or no. I would leave that to the person who's receiving the information to decide what that connection is. But maybe even more than the connection, it just helps them put our meaning into context and how much of a truth it really represents to the human nature.
Well, Zane, speaking about the point within the circle, you were on this very podcast speaking about the point within the circle last season. I don't know
how about that? I didn't
off the top of my head, but all the listeners should go back and listen to that one. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, it's a fun topic. So those are the things that those are the kind of topics that we'll talk about and present, and then have conversations about in our lodge meeting. So that's pretty typical.
So I think Troy was talking about it too, that, and maybe Ken can help to explain that, and you already alluded to it, that there's Freemasonry doesn't necessarily hold the exclusive rights on any of these ideas, right? And so do you feel like the men came to Freemasonry with, so we talked about how you guys came to Freemasonry, how you were you already esoteric or not? But some of these mystic schools and some of these men that came in, Mackie and whatnot, McCoy and all, do you believe esoteric previously to coming into Masonry, or did they develop that and then these other mystery schools, they pulled from those things, or how did that come together, do you think, Ken?
Well, I think through curiosity, you begin to find stepping stones. As you discover something, a truth that excites you, and you start saying it, within Freemasonry, we take good men and we make them better. Well, how do we do that? We learn about things that are new to us because they're not something that we learned either in our normal schooling, from our parents, from anywhere else. And they have great value to us. Now, what's valuable to me or you, everyone has an individual path. But when you find value on that, who wouldn't turn away from that? And the more value that they find, that's what we were discussing yesterday. It's really your time, your energy, and your money. And if I'm finding that my time is being well spent, I'm willing to spend more of my energy toward that. And if I'm on a goal of being a better person, I want to better understand things, I keep finding truisms or finding where those dead ends are, I'll invest a whole lot more time with that. And I think that, Mackie, Pike, anyone else in the past that's spent any time here has been excited because they found the truisms that were here also.
I would add to that, if you take, one of the topics that's not often discussed in Lodge is like the origins of Freemasonry. And it can be a controversial topic. There's no doubt about that. And anytime there's a topic that's controversial, there's going to be people who are like, that is absolutely not the way that happened, or that is absolutely the way that that's happened. It can be very divisive. That being said, it's worth exploring. And, anybody who thinks that Freemasonry didn't start until 1717, really is sort of ignoring bona fide historical documentation that speaks to Freemasonry having existed before 1717. That was simply the formation of the Grand Lodge in England. So clearly that was lodges coming together to form that, which means they existed before. And so well, how much further before? Well, the oldest Masonic Lodge minutes go back to 1599. You can look up the Lansdowne manuscript from 1560, and it talks about that, and the Cook manuscript talk about the 7 liberal arts and sciences. By the time you get to in a Masonic context, as if that's well, I'll just say that Freemasons would read that and go, "Oh, interesting. That looks awfully familiar." And this goes back into the mid 1500s. And by the time you fast forward up to the 1700s, and I think most Masons are at least familiar with like Anderson's Constitution. They may not have read it, which is again another topic that should be read in Lodge and talked about. What is this document? It's pretty important to the formation of this organization. Maybe we ought to explore it. But by the time you read about Anderson's Constitution, you realize, this gets to your point earlier, Dave, that the Grand Master who instructed Anderson to record the constitutions was, at the time, the Grand Master was John de Gallier. He was not the first Grand Master of the United Grand Lodge of England, but I think he was the second or the third. But he studied under Isaac Newton. He became Grand Master in 1719. He was a practicing alchemist. He brought information into the craft. And while we credit Anderson for the constitutions, dang sure that like the Grand Master was having his influence on what are those constitutions and what are those teachings. And so, again, can you draw a linear line between these and easily connect the dots? Well, and that's a little more challenging. But to your question of, did these early, Masons bring things into the craft? Yeah, I think absolutely so. That's my personal opinion.
I mean, maybe they spent more time on the teachings of the esoteric meanings behind the working tools and things like that.
Oh, I tend to think that they people who understand esoteric ideas they're not keeping the entire idea from you. What they're going to do is they're going to veil it and embed that information into something that you can only extract if you understand what it is to be extracted. Like to know that there's something to extract and understand the little clues along the way. So they'll put something into, like, for example, our degree work. And so that degree work absolutely has additional meaning, and it's like, packed into that. But you might only know it from a bit of an exoteric viewpoint, that it's in our degree work or it's in our drama, and you might not know what it means.
Illustrated by symbols and
veiled in allegory.
Yeah.
Are you willing to take the time and do the work?
Right. And it's an interesting thing, because I'm the guy who deals with the candidates as they're coming to our lodge, and the ones that are searching that type of information, I really put it to them as to how much are they willing to put into it to get that information, because it's there and available, but it's something that's got to be sought out, not it's not necessarily going to be taught to you.
Well, as another example, so there's a District 8 here in Washington, up north. While we've all been locked down during quarantine here, Zoom has sort of taken over everybody's life. And so they've tried to move their district meetings, which for that district, they were trying to focus a little bit more on education. So Right Worshipful Steve reached out and said, could you, present on this topic? I heard you present on it at your lodge. And I said, sure, no problem. So it was just symbolism in the entered apprentice degree. So it's things that I found that not only are part of our degree, but might help explain why they're part of our degree. And it was extremely well received. The brothers that were, it was Masonic only, but the brothers that were on that line were were there was a lot of aha moments. Like I'll just say that there was like I had no idea that was, you know, maybe a root of why that was in our degree work. And they were like, do you do a talk on the fellowcraft degree? And I said, sure, I could do that. And then that progressed to the Master Mason degree. So we kind of went through this series of three lectures, basically presentations, I like to think of them, and then dialogue afterwards, and a lot of good questions, and got guys thinking. And frankly, the you know, not to be too off topic, but what's so exciting about that is there were guys that are reaching out either, you know, during the, you know, the event or after. They'd email me and they say, it was really interesting to learn about this. You've caused me to want to learn more about X. And it might have just been a brief comment that I had made, but it really interested them. And he said, I'm going to go study about it. And I'm so excited to present this in Lodge, and I'll tell you when I'm going to do it. And I emailed him back and said, I'd love to be there. Just let me know when you're going to do that. And that is really exciting to see, because it's like our way of paying it forward. I'm sure Ken's experienced things like that, and I know I have. So, you know, you kind of feel like you're, we say, the cable tow or the mystic tie. Maybe it's kind of the same as paying it forward, but anyway.
We had kind of a similar experience with the trestle boards. I mean, other than the degrees, when do we ever talk about them? So you have this one experience, and we said, why don't we just make that the feature talk of that night? Let's stare at it and really go through the symbolism. What else do you see, or what didn't you see that you want more of an explanation? And just instead of using our teachings, let's have brothers just express what they see. Then through that process, there seemed to be somebody in the room that would say, well, I see this, and I got meaning from my faith, from, you know, some different background. And it was amazing what more we learned about the trestle board teachings than just what was in our degree lectures. And we did that for all three. It was wonderful.
Do you guys do that right after the degree concludes while you're still in the lodge room, or do you meet separately? Like, do you adjourn and is that more of a casual thing, or how do you facilitate that in your lodge?
This one specifically, these were are part of our education for the stated meeting.
Okay.
So we prepared everyone. We told them what it was. We sent out photographs of a trestle board so they could kind of look at it and do a little bit of background work. And then we had handouts, and we did kind of a walkthrough and kind of explaining the degree presentation of what you were getting. So some very, very factual, but not going over the degree, and then asking people, what did they get out of it?
Very cool. Great idea.
We have all the tools there. We just got to start using them.
Right.
When you reach the 99th degree, you'll find out the true secrets.
Yeah, there's actually some lodges here in BC that are now asking candidates to do papers, do short papers on their experience and the things they identified with and so on. And it's really interesting to hear what these guys come up with.
It's a really good point, Stephen. When Ken and I did our Elephant in the Room presentation, which will be online in the Grand Lodge of Washington, I think. I don't know when they'll pop, make it available on Grandview, but soon. Anyway, one of the things that we talked about in our lodge was we'll have men who are petitioning our lodge. We'll give them a charge called the Ways of Virtue, which is not something that we utilize in the Grand Lodge of Washington, and it's not esoteric. It's like what we'd call like an opening charge, but it has a lot of like really neat, really, I think, important ideas that we'd like to have them reflect on. So we asked them to write a response to that and include that with their petition. And then besides just getting their petition and their money, and voting on them, we're getting our and we've already met them for several months, but we're causing them to think about what they're going to step into before they actually do. And I think, yep. And that's Colbeth is already flashing that. The reason I'm bringing this up is because it ties directly into what you're saying, Steve. However, I received probably, I don't even know how many emails from brothers that were on the line in the class, and they wanted a copy of this. And maybe they just wanted to know what the heck I was giving out to people. But again, we figured it's not used in Washington, so we're not revealing anything from our standard work. But for that reason, and this is before they even become a Mason.
We have kind of a similar program, only a different way of going about the similar kind of a prospect. We have a book that we ask our candidates to read, and it's called Iron John. It's by an author, Robert Bly. It's really a mid-90s New York Times bestseller. One, it's a phenomenal story in itself. It's really deals about men being men. But the book itself is teaching in a very kind of Masonic way, in that it's an allegorical story. And so, one, it's a good story that they should be reading. But part two is, can they really read an allegorical story and see if they can really pull out what the meaning is going to be? So we get to test them if they can understand that type of teaching, and then kind of coach them if they're having any struggles. We haven't run into anyone that's really had a problem with it, but we would ask them to attend one of our dinners, and before our stated meeting, would you talk with us about what you've gone through, what you got out of this? So likewise, it gives them an opportunity to see a type of teaching that we do, and also be comfortable in standing in front of brothers and other people that maybe they're not quite used to yet, and getting that level of trust.
So if one is not getting I don't know what the word is, discovering these layers, and you want to learn more about it, where's a good resource for this? And other than calling up one of you two guys and asking about it, where would you point someone to begin their journey?
Well, I'd start, there isn't a whole lot of places for men to go. If you said the opposite question, where can a woman go today? And I go, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of places that will help women with glass ceilings, politics, everywhere. And you say, well, where can men go today? And our opportunities have really narrowed. If you say, I can go to a religious organization, or it's really the Freemasons. We're the ones that are dedicated to taking good men and making them better. So it only becomes is there a lodge? What is their focus? Who do I relate to the men that are there? I think that we are that key.
Matt, if we were talking about a Mason, I would say, you're not getting that out of your lodge, or you're interested in learning more about this. I'll put a plug in for Ken. Just if it is, just go to the Esotericism and Freemasonry conference. That's usually in the fall, and I'm hoping that we'll do it in person. But I think that's a great way to be exposed to it. But I would say read. We have like a saying in our lodge: leaders are readers, and we don't have a formal book club per se, but I know that lodges have tried that. They'll read Esoterica by Pike, and they'll talk about it, and they'll kind of go chapter. I think Ken's lodge has done something like that before, or maybe if it wasn't a lodge, it was a study group. I'd make a plug for two books that I think have been very, I've read them, and the first one is called The Way of the Craftsman, and it's by Kirk McNulty. It's a great book. It's kind of, it's not complicated to understand, like a morals and dogma kind of book, but it's not a historical, laid back, easy reading either. It talks about some, it's the search for the spiritual essence of craft Freemasonry. So it delves into some things, but in a very easy to understand read. And then the other book I would encourage brothers to read is another book called Contemplative Masonry. And that's by C.R. Dunning. And that's like mindfulness, meditation, and imagery for the craft. And I think just you read a couple of books like that, it is going to start the engine, and just you're going to go from there. It doesn't take much to have people go, wow, I had no idea there was more, and I want to learn more. And that's what they're really actually looking for. And I think Ken and I saw that in the class that we taught last weekend. And even the feedback that we got, which was really interesting to see. It clearly is what men who are part of lodges really want. They want something more. They want education. They want to have, discussion. So you don't have to look very far.
I agree strongly with what Zane just said. Contemplative Masonry by Chuck Dunning. If you spend time really looking at anything and any time really in your heart contemplating it, meditating on it, why do we use this? Those things begin to open up to you, and you start finding the other brothers that had either a similar experience, again, saw things from another point of view that are willing to share with you. It just becomes addictive as to how much you can take in, depending on how much time you have to spend with it.
And with that starting point for our listeners here, I think we're going to have to wrap up. Although I see David looked like he was about to open his mouth. No, he's.
Well, I was just going to say they could Google Masonic reading list and you come up with 100 answers. But we can certainly try and put some things in the show notes. Our Deputy Grandmaster has a blog that he's created and has put together a recommended reading list that's really, really good. I think Scottish Rite has a recommended reading list. There's almost every organization you could go to, and they probably have a recommended reading list. But which is the great thing. You can as Zane said, readers are leaders. You can always learn more. And if you just focused around the 3 degrees to begin with and dug into them, understood what they mean or what they mean to you, then you'll have that foundation, and then you can continue to grow and learn and do more.
Yeah, I probably in my personal library of Masonic books, I probably have more than 100 Masonic books, and some of them I'll read. I mean, all of them I read or read sections of or something like that. But it's funny to find a topic in one, and this is how the rabbit hole works in Zane's mind. It's like you read a section and you're like, oh, that's a really interesting topic. I think I read about something like that in another book, and I got to go to my library and kind of find like, okay, now which book was that? And so I'll start thumbing through, and pretty soon it's like 3 or 4 or 5 books have kind of piled up on my desk that have this little thread sort of running throughout, not necessarily the whole book, but just sections of the book. And pretty soon, you got this kind of multi-dimensional, thought process around a topic. And all of a sudden it kind of takes on this, like, this would be a great presentation to give in lodge or to, anyone who's willing to listen to it, but that's a lot of times how those things really start. It's not like I sit around and just go, oh yeah, that would be interesting. It's usually something that you read, and it's usually a little tidbit, and then you want to know more. And so you start, you kind of start off on this little, quest to find more, and more starts coming in, and you got to really stay focused. And I've got a whole list of just topics that are someday future presentations that are, it's a long list. I'll probably never get to it all, but that's how it kind of works for me. And I think that's how that spark gets going.
Well, I like to think that we here on the Working Tools podcast are always looking to learn more. And so with that, Zane and Ken, thank you very much for coming on the show. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And on behalf of Steve and David and myself, thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast. Goodbye.